What's up? This is Fahrenheit, back with another video. I was hoping to have this video finished last week, but unfortunately I wasn't able to. But we're here now, so without any more delay, let's get into it. The topic for this video is, if Marvel vs. Capcom 4 was announced, and you had the chance to choose the roster of Capcom characters, who would they be? Capcom management then tells you, the only caveat is, you can't choose any characters that have appeared in previous Capcom crossover fighting games, whether they were playable or simply assist characters. And you can only choose one character per franchise. What would that list of characters look like? Marvel vs. Capcom is quite literally fan service the fighting game. So popular characters as well as niche ones should both be represented. Regardless of how obscure the character, if you want to see them and you think they'd bring something unique to the game, put them in your list. The characters don't have to be listed in any particular order. That said, this is my dream roster of Capcom characters for Marvel vs. Capcom 4. Disclaimer, there may be some spoilers in here for some of the characters if you haven't played through the games they're from. So, with that said, let's get into it. Asuda from Asuda's Wrath. Asuda is a character I've seen many people mention should have been in the most recent Marvel vs. Capcom game that's come out, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. And for good reason. He's really cool looking, has badass attacks, and has an indomitable fighting spirit that can make the player feel like they can just take on anybody. I think Asuda looks awesome, and him being in a Marvel vs. Capcom game as a playable character would allow the developers to give the players access to many of Asuda's over-the-top attacks and forms from some of the coolest moments in Asuda's Wrath. Next on my list is Nero from Devil May Cry 4. Now, I remember back when I first saw Devil May Cry 4, I was kind of put off by the fact that Dante seemed to be playing second fiddle to a new main character. I didn't understand why the designers created a new main character that looked so much like Dante instead of just letting me play as Dante himself. Then I played the game. And even though you only get to play as Dante halfway through the game, I realized what the designers were trying to do. They wanted to create a character that could be used to show the more human side of Devil May Cry's world. Nero didn't identify with being a demon, and he lived closely amongst humans. The designers wanted to show how humans revered Sparta as a deity instead of a demon, and Nero was supposed to be the next generation of young, angsty demon hunter with elements of both Dante and Virgil in his design. Now don't get me wrong, Devil May Cry 3 Dante is awesome. And he's easily one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character, right alongside Virgil in the entirety of Devil May Cry series. But Devil May Cry 3 was a prequel. And Nero, as a character, well, he makes logical sense to the progression of Devil May Cry's story. I think Capcom should stick to their guns and continue to use Nero as the most current representative of Devil May Cry. They should just give him a chance. I mean, he's no slouch in Devil May Cry 4, let me tell you. One of the reasons he won me over is because of how cool he is in action, and I think he has amazing potential as a Marvel vs. Capcom character. His Devil Bringer could be used as a command grab to grab opponents, and he can instantly parry and throw back certain projectiles with it, just like in Devil May Cry 4. He could use his Exceed mechanic as well, where he does critical damage if timed just right, which would also change the dynamic of his attacks, just like in Devil May Cry 4. This would act as Nero's own personal EX attacks, and his Devil Trigger, oh man, his Devil Trigger would be sick, allowing the player to charge up his level 3 Blue Rose charge shot, using the spinning bolts to open the opponent up long enough to hit them with either Nero's Showdown or his Maximum Bet, which of course would be two of his supers in the game. I swear, Nero could be pure fire in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. To me, he would be one of the coolest inclusions. Moving on to the next character, Jean from God Hand. Jean seems like another example of a character under Capcom's license that is just perfect for a fighting game, but because of poor sales or whatnot, he's never used for anything. I mean, he's literally a parody of fighting anime and video games. He has so many things to choose from in terms of his attacks. I could just see him sarcastically curb stomping or drop kicking or body slamming or field goal kicking his opponents in a fighting game setting. And then his bob and weave could be used to like slip in and out of an opponent's range. And of course, he would have his ridiculously powerful God Hand and all of its many different abilities. He just seems like another character that would be such a fun spectacle to watch in action, while still potentially really fun to play with all of his crazy yet cool moves. Alright, moving on to Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil. Leon is a fan favorite for many Resident Evil fans and has been since Resident Evil 2, and especially for a lot of people since Resident Evil 4. He has appeared as the main character in all 3 CG animated Resident Evil films, and he seemed like the logical next step for a Resident Evil character choice in Marvel vs. Capcom, since we've already seen Jill, Chris, and Wesker in previous titles already. But honestly, I had no vision for what Leon's gameplay concept would be, or what he would even look like if he fought in a fighting game. I mainly added him to this list because I just felt like it was his turn to be represented as the Resident Evil franchise character in a crossover fighting game. You see, the problem I was facing was Jill Valentine already acted as the Resident Evil parody character in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. She parodies pretty much Resident Evil as a whole. She had the zombies that bite at opponents' faces or ankles. She had the flaming zombies. She had the crows, demon dogs, the tyrant, the grenade launcher, green herbs. Many things that are still part of the current, Resident Evil landscape. Then you had Chris and Jill in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which were parodies of their appearances in Resident Evil 5. For Jill, that meant fighting as the Wesker brainwashed Nina Williams battlesuit version of herself. And then for Chris, that meant being armed with nearly, if not every weapon that he wielded in Resident Evil 5. Even the grenade launcher with the elemental shells and that satellite laser cannon he used on Ouroboros Excella Gione. I simply didn't have any ideas as to what unique elements Leon could bring to Marvel vs. Capcom. But then I thought about his most recent appearances in the latest Resident Evil CG film, Resident Evil Vendetta, which is a movie I might talk about later on in another video. But anyway, that movie helped me to begin to see what could potentially be a cool gameplay style for him. The bullet ballet in that movie is insane, and about a third of it is coming from Leon himself. So that got me thinking, okay, that looks cool, but how would that work in a fighting game though? And then I thought about characters like BlazBlue's Noelle Vermillion and her Equilibrium-inspired gun kata gameplay style, as well as Elfelt from Guilty Gear Xrd with how she uses her guns and grenades. If Capcom used them as a reference point, right, we could see Leon using a gun kata gameplay style that switches between gunplay and melee attacks, and maybe even couple that with Ada Wong as a special assist character for him for a couple of his attacks. Oh, and they should totally put in that weapon he had in Resident Evil 4 on the PS2, that I think was based off of the Nightmare beta from the very first Devil May Cry game. He should definitely have that. That would be sick. Next up is Edward Falcon from Power Stone. First of all, Edward Falcon, that sounds just like a superhero name. I mean, come on, like it's perfect. and I think he would just fit well in the story landscape of Marvel vs. Capcom. I could just picture him fighting with characters like Iron Man and Captain America, and I could just like imagine the dialogue between them. Like Captain America would say to Edward that he had a comrade named Falcon, alluding to Samuel Wilson, his comrade when he used to be Falcon. And then like Iron Man could reference how when Edward transforms into, using his Power Stone, he looks like a model of Tony Stark's Iron Man armor. It just seems like it would just fit, It would just work. And having the Infinity Stones and Power Stones both become a part of the Marvel vs. Capcom landscape would be a pretty cool way to bring a Power Stone character into the game, as well as take the stakes of the story to new heights. Okay, so Onimusha is a series that I really wish Capcom would bring back. One cool way to start doing that could be by putting a character from the series in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. This was one of those situations though, where I was unsure what character to choose from the series. But in the end, I decided to just go with the obvious choice. The one that started it all, Samanosuke Akechi. The reason why is because I think the original Onimusha should finally get a chance in a crossover fighting game. And perhaps they could, I don't know, like mix up Samanosuke's weapons from both the first Onimusha and the third one in his gameplay. This could give Samanosuke kind of like a different elemental blades that could be that could have different effects on opponents. Kind of like how the Silver Samurai could change the element of his attacks in X-Men Children of the Autumn. I think that's the game he did that in. And then they got to make sure to have Samanosuke's moveset patterns be similar to the way he fought in that awesome opening that was in Onimusha 3 Demon Siege. Justice Gakuen, or Justice Academy, or Project Justice, or Rival Schools, or whichever title you prefer. That's another franchise I really wish Capcom would bring back. But a Justice Academy character in a Marvel vs. Capcom game is like the next best thing, right? The only question is, which character from the series should appear? Well, I thought to myself, if not Batsu, if not Kyosuke, if not Hinata, then who? Because for those who remember, Hinata acted as a type of assist for Kyosuke in his Super Final Grade remix in Capcom vs. SNK 2. And remember, we're not counting any assist characters on this list. In the end, I decided Roy Bromwell would be the character I'd like to see. And here's why. Batsu has been in a crossover game before, but Roy is to Batsu what Ken is to Ryu. Not only that, Roy Bromwell is basically what you get if Ken Masters did the Dragon Ball Z fusion dance with Terry Bogard. So his inclusion in Marvel vs. Capcom would be like not only getting a character that is kind of like Ken without actually putting Ken in the game to avoid having too many Shoto characters in the game that fight too similar to each other, because in this hypothetical Marvel vs. Capcom 4 game, we know Ryu has to be there, so that's a given. But it also would be like getting to have Terry Bogard in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. So with Roy, we basically get a Street Fighter character and a King of Fighters character all neatly wrapped up in a Rival Schools character. It's like a triple threat. I mean, I think that'd be so dope. Also, maybe he could even have a super similar to Kyosuke's Final Grade remix, right? Where he has like other Rival School character like Tiffany Lords or Hideo Shimazu come out and assist him in doing his double rising tornado team up technique. I think that'd be dope. Anyway, on to the next character. The magical and mysterious character that was supposed to debut in Capcom's Fighting All-Stars, Ingrid. Ingrid hasn't really showed up in many games, but she's just one of those characters that I've always had a bit of a soft spot for. I always felt like Capcom designed her to be more fleshed out, but because of the cancellation of the fighting game project Capcom Fighting All-Stars, Ingrid was heavily relegated to just obscurity. I don't think I need to describe how she would play, since she's been playable in fighting games before. I'd simply like to see her potentially show up in a Marvel vs. Capcom game, where her mysterious powers can be shown off in an even more fun, over-the-top way. Alright, this last character is another obscure one, and is one many people probably wouldn't even consider, but I think has potential in a fighting game setting. Vanessa Z. Schneider from PN3. Now, just try to picture it with me, right? They could combine her long-distance palm shot with fluid dancing ballerina-style melee attacks, right? Her moveset could be composed of her various energy drives from her own game, which act in different ways. Many would act as special attacks, while some others would act as support techniques. She could have her different Aegis suits act as different attack and defensive modes. Instead of changing into a different colored Aegis suit, like she does in PN3 when you change your suit right before a mission, like her Prima Blazer, Terra Guardian, Ultra Fusion, and Blackbird Aegis suits, but instead, in this game, Vanessa could instantly switch between a default fusion mode for balanced attack and defensive stats and command options. I imagine she would start each match in this mode, right? Then she could switch into a Blazer mode for higher attack stats and relentless attack options, and a Guardian mode for increased defense stats and defensive options. I imagine she'd be a cool, sexy, and stylish character that is unlike any other character in a Capcom crossover fighting game. A cool, cybernetically enhanced ballerina dancing mercenary. I mean, but really though, just think about how interesting it would be for a newcomer to Marvel vs. Capcom to see Vanessa's unique movement style through her very fluid dancing animations. That'd be so cool. And, of course, for fans like me, the idea of seeing the character who is basically the prototype for both Bayonetta and Vanquish as a playable character in a Capcom fighting game is super exciting, to say the least. Now, before I end the video, I actually have a short honorable mentions list. Just a few characters that I wanted to add to the main list, but they didn't quite make it because of the only one character per franchise rule that we had set in the beginning of the video, or because I didn't know enough about the franchise and its characters, but I still thought they should be mentioned because they probably deserve a chance in the Marvel vs. Capcom spotlight. Firstly, I want to bring up Breath of Fire and the Red Earth franchises. Now, I don't really know much about either one of those two, but I know that they've been around for a long time, and it would be really cool if they finally got some representation in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who would thoroughly appreciate that. So I wanted to put them in an honorable mentions list. Even though I don't know that much about them, I still think it would be cool for the fans of those franchises who've been, sticking with Capcom for this long. As for me, personally, I'd like to see Lady from the Devil May Cry series. I picked Nero as the one who I feel like should be chosen over anyone else as a Devil May Cry representative in a Marvel vs. Capcom, and that's because he's literally the next generation of Devil Hunter. He's literally that next character. He was the protagonist, right? But Lady is a character I always thought was really cool. I think in Devil May Cry 3 and 4, when she's got the more sleek, sexy kind of look, I like both of them. I think she looked awesome. In the special edition of Devil May Cry 4, she's really cool. She's got some really cool moves I'd love to see in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. I'd really like to see Lady appear as a very melee-based kind of, not melee, a range-based character in a Marvel vs. Capcom. I think that would be dope. Jack Baker from Resident Evil 7. Jack Baker is a character I originally scoffed at, but as I thought more about it, I started seeing the potential in his inclusion in Marvel vs. Capcom. For one thing, his inclusion would help boom the sales of Resident Evil 7, but more to the point, he could add an interesting personality to the game and an intimidating set of attacks. I imagine he'd have moves like being able to walk through an opponent's attacks using super armor in a similar fashion to how he just walks through walls in his own game. He would still take damage, but he wouldn't flinch, right? From this action, he could maybe move into a command grab and or a special attack. As I thought about this character, really it was his supers that made me the most enthusiastic to see him as a playable character. Seeing him pull out a giant pair of chainsaw scissors that he just starts swinging wildly while screaming at the opponent, or having him have a super where he just pulls the top off of a car and starts driving donuts on the ground over and over while mocking the player, that they just start running. I mean, that would be pretty cool. I think those are things that players who played Resident Evil 7 would appreciate, and for those who are seeing it for the first time would just be caught up in the spectacle of it all. The next honorable mention is another pretty obscure character, Jubei Akane Yagyu from Shin Onimusha Dawn of Dreams. I actually personally would like to see her over Samanosuke Akechi. The reason why I chose Samanosuke Akechi over her is for the reasons I mentioned when I was describing his place on the list, which was because he's the original. And I feel like before anybody else, he should be represented. But personally, I'd like to see Akane. I feel like there was this kind of place where Capcom left the Onimusha series. Again, I mentioned there might be spoilers on this list. For anyone who beat Onimusha Dawn of Dreams, it pretty much leaves you with having Jubei Akane Yagyu as the potential new main character if the series continued. But then, of course, they never continued the series. And I was really excited to see her potentially, move on to become the next Onimusha, or, follow in her grandfather's footsteps of the Jubei from Onimusha 2, Samurai's Destiny. So, I think, I really like the idea of those possibilities. It's really what gets me excited, those possibilities that just kind of just left out there, and I would like to see them realized. And she's a character that thoroughly represents that. However, I wanted to be objective and be generous and make Samanosuke the representative of Onimusha first, before they make a character like Akane playable in a Marvel vs. Capcom. And like I said, Samanosuke, I think he's dope, so it's not like it's a loss. And the last character on my honorable mentions list, I was going to put them on the actual list, and I came to my senses. Evil Rao, or Suzu Rao, from Okami, basically the Nine Tails. I thought that would have been such a cool idea, really obscure. It would have been a character that only people who played through Okami would have known about, which is a gem in the rough, let me tell you, of a video game. It had to play through like 2/3 of the game in order to get to that part where they would even see Suzu Rao and know who she was. But I was just so like caught up in like the geekdom of that. I was like, that'd be so cool, and the character's so cool, and like the dark celestial brush user has like 9 different tails, all have 9 different like brushes and different techniques and all of that stuff. And then the reality of it hit me. The thing about Okami is the art style is so intrinsically linked to the presentation of the game and how the characters are recognizable, and the main character, Matarasu, is actually less stylized than the human characters in the game. And so I started thinking about taking a character that looked like Rao, a human character, in her proportions and art style, and put her right next to a character like Captain America in a Marvel's Capcom. That would look so weird. So I put her on the honorable mentions list instead, because I still think the concept is cool, but I feel like that the art direction element, the art style element, is just such a major obstacle that would keep her from being a potential possibility, or an actual character. But yeah, there you go, guys. That's my dream roster of Capcom characters for Marvel vs. Capcom 4. What's your list look like? What characters do you think would make a cool, unique addition to Marvel vs. Capcom? Let me know in the comments section. That's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching and listening. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the next video, which will be pertaining to Marvel characters this time. But until then, guys, this is Fahrenheit, signing out.